Karma and Reincarnation, the Key to Spiritual Evolution and Enlightenment, by Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama. Editor's Introduction. This book is a compilation of writings on karma and reincarnation published in Japanese by Dr. Hiroshi Motoyama from 1975 until 1992. The body of the text is loosely based on two written sources, Rinne Tensei no Himitsu, The Mystery of Transmigration, published in 1981, which I translated from the original Japanese, and the monograph Analyzing Individual Karma and Reincarnation, published by his Research Institute in 1986. These texts, in turn, are largely comprised of edited transcripts of lectures given by Dr. Motoyama to his many students and Shinto followers. This turned out to be a bit problematic when preparing for an English edition, because of the great number of shared philosophical assumptions between speaker and audience. In working with the material, I have tried to weave as many of these assumptions into the text as possible in order to give the work a more comprehensive and definitive context. The hidden material comes from years of discussion and correspondence with Dr. Motoyama and his staff, and they, of course, have carefully approved this final version. There are two larger contextual issues, however, that I wish to address in this introduction. The first, about the author. The second, about how the material was obtained. Dr. Motoyama is an unusually gifted and learned man who is difficult to categorize. His areas of expertise span many disciplines. He is both a man of science and of religion, a priest, a philosopher, a yogi, a physiological psychologist, a computer specialist, a researcher of Oriental medicine, a parapsychologist who trained with Rhine in the 1960s, an electrical engineer, a spiritual healer, and a seer. He was born in 1925 on the island of Shodoshima in the Seto Inland Sea in Japan. Dr. Motoyama began his spiritual training when he was 5 years old under an unusual circumstance. His natural mother, Seiko Yoshima, is by nature a deeply religious woman. While on a spiritual pilgrimage with her son, she met the founder of the Tamamitsu sect of Shintoism, Reverend Kinue Motoyama, Odai-sama. Reverend Motoyama was a profound mystic and healer who had recently experienced revelations of the upcoming war, World War II, and had been directed to establish a shrine on Shodoshima and a congregation devoted to the cause of world peace. When Reverend Motoyama met Seiko Yoshima and her 5-year-old son, Hiroshi, she realized that their three destinies were tightly interlinked. She intuitively understood that the woman was to be her spiritual companion in her life's work, and that the boy was to be her spiritual successor. Seiko Yoshima reciprocally felt such a deep affinity and trust in Reverend Motoyama that she and her young son soon joined Reverend Motoyama on a pilgrimage throughout southern Japan, praying for peace at various shrines. The two women immediately began to instruct the child in forms of spiritual practice and asceticism that normally would be initiated when a child was much older, such as the traditional rite of chanting sutras while standing naked under a freezing waterfall. But the boy, Hiroshi, responded ardently, and soon began to have experiences of the non-physical dimension of existence, mystical or spiritual or religious experiences. He began to have regular experiences of clairvoyance and telepathy, and was able to communicate with disembodied spirits in the higher dimension. He was very aware of the presence of the divine principle functioning in the material world. The three of them eventually settled permanently in Tokyo, where they established a branch of the Tamamitsu Shrine in 1935, when Hiroshi was 10. The boy began a daily regime of early morning yogic exercises, prayer, and meditation, carrying through into his teens. He attained major spiritual breakthroughs in his 20s. Reverend Motoyama adopted him as her successor, and the three remained together until Reverend Motoyama died in 1974. At the time of the writing of this book in 1992, Seiko Yoshima was aged 85, and she continued in the position of head priestess of the shrine, where Dr. Motoyama is the head priest. Dr. Motoyama and his mother faithfully continue to broaden and deepen their experiences of the nature of reality through daily practice. Dr. Motoyama was an exceptionally brilliant student. He began his academic life as a philosopher, with the professional aim of assessing the nature of spiritual experience in a logical, objective manner. He obtained his PhD in philosophy and psychophysiology in 1962. He gradually became frustrated by the inability of philosophy to communicate or bring about the direct experience of higher states of consciousness. Around the same time, he became aware that his mental experiences were creating physiological changes in his body. He began the study of psychophysiology and medicine in order to ascertain what those changes were, to try and begin to apply the rigors of modern scientific discipline to objectify the process of the evolution of human consciousness. To this aim, Dr. Motoyama founded the Institute of Religious Psychology in 1960, a bustling research facility located on the grounds of the Tamamitsu Shrine in Tokyo. Years of physiological research on many individuals who had undergone similar spiritual experience, such as Indian yogis, Zen masters, psychic surgeons from the Philippines, Catholic healers, etc., led him to speculate that the mind and the body are connected through a subtle system of energy circulation not yet recognized by Western science. He speculated that this system was somehow linked to the meridian system posited by Oriental medicine, upon which acupuncture is based, and the chakra and nadi system of Indian thought and Ayurvedic medicine. He began to study these subjects in depth. Concurrently, Dr. Motoyama felt that present-day instrumentation was incapable of measuring the subtler system, which he had come to believe had an electrophysiological manifestation in the body fluid, in the connective tissue of the body. He began the study of electrical engineering, which led to his invention of the AMI, the apparatus for measuring the functioning of the meridians and their corresponding internal organs, in the early 1970s. And then he developed what is called the chakra instrument, a highly sensitive system which monitors subtle fluctuations of energy field around the human body, and other physiological variables in 1974. At the time of writing this book in 1992, for the previous 15 years, Dr. Motoyama had conducted pioneering scientific research with these two devices that has brought him a growing international recognition. A detailed description of his research lies outside the scope of this introduction, but the reader can learn more from other English publications that are online. In 1973, the Institute established the International Association for Religion and Parapsychology as a global forum for advancing academic and scientific research into related disciplines. In 1980, his institute established the Motoyama Bentov Fund, which offers a 3-month research fellowship to promote students who wish to pursue the holistic study of human existence. Dr. Motoyama has published over 50 books and hundreds of articles in Japanese, and lectures frequently. The bulk of the material for this present book comes from 50 years of what Dr. Motoyama calls spiritual consultations that he and the late Reverend Motoyama performed in the shrine. In a spiritual consultation, a shrine member comes to Dr. Motoyama with a problem. Dr. Motoyama meditates with him or her and looks back psychically over their present and former lives to find the root cause of the problem. He may look into the future to see the probable outcome of the situation if the subject does not alter his or her behavior. Then he comes back to the present and suggests the most appropriate course of action to remedy the situation. Through years of spiritual discipline, Dr. Motoyama has attained the ability to unify his being with manifestations of the Absolute, that he refers to variously as the higher being, or God, or expanded consciousness. In this unified state, which transcends the limits of time and space, he is able to directly and clearly perceive the past, the future, and the non-physical dimensions of existence that are connected to the physical realm. In this unified state, his consciousness is able to connect directly with an object in the external world and to affect it. This enables him, for instance, to cure the illness of a person who is in a physically distant location when such action is appropriate. Over the last 50 years, Dr. and Reverend Motoyama have performed more than 40,000 of these consultations. They have drawn two consistent conclusions from their work. The first is that human beings are born onto the earth many times. The second is that the continuum of birth, life, death, and rebirth is governed by the universal principle of karma, which is the moral law of cause and effect that assumes that every action an individual takes will bear an equivalent result at some point in time. Dr. Motoyama firmly believes that the purpose of existence is the spiritual evolution of the individual. He claims that the essence of this evolutionary process is a universal one, and that there is an absolute existence which transcends, yet encompasses, all the traditional religions and spiritual paths that presently exist and all that have ever existed. Rather than establishing a new ideology, he and his mothers have been interested in working to understand the process of spiritual evolution in a way that can be applied to any individual's specific circumstance. Dr. Motoyama contends that a coherent understanding of karma and reincarnation are crucial to the process of spiritual evolution. Accordingly, As he states in his preface, this book is not an argument for or against the truth of karma and reincarnation. Instead, it is an attempt to explain how these principles work. I myself studied and worked closely with Dr. Motoyama in Tokyo from 1975 to 1980, and we maintain a warm association. He and his gracious wife, Mrs. Kaoru Motoyama, have been unfailing in their patient support of my efforts to translate and edit this often difficult material into English. The manuscript was completed through close cooperation with the International Division of the Institute of Religious Psychology. I would especially like to thank Mrs. Kiyomi Kuratani of the Translation Department for her painstaking help in translation and continued editorial assistance. I also wish to thank Dr. Arthur Thornhill for reviewing the translations and offering invaluable advice. Rande Brown Ouchi, New York, 1992. Preface by Dr. Motoyama. The primary fact of historical existence is that all things, both living and inanimate, come into being and later vanish. This holds true on every possible scale. The galactic system itself has not always existed. It was born about 10 billion years ago, and at some point in the future it will die. During the time our universe has been in existence, it has gradually produced the sun, the earth, and an environment able to support life as we know it. It gave birth to the human race a relatively short time ago, a few million years at most. During the time that billions of individual human beings have lived and died, we have collectively evolved a civilization capable of landing a man on the moon. What governs this process of birth and death, of growth and development? Present-day scientists tend to rely on the various theories of evolution in search for these answers. I myself am a scientist, a doctorate in psychophysiology, but feel that a scientific approach to these questions has serious shortcomings. The main problem is that scientific theories of evolution deal only with the physical dimension, which is but one aspect of a much more complicated reality. When and if they are ever proven, these theories are inherently incapable of explaining anything beyond the facts of physical development. But what of the much larger question of the evolution of the human mind, the human spirit? Along with being a scientist, I am also a Shinto priest. Through years of strict religious discipline, I have managed to awaken to states of consciousness that enable me to see beyond the limited dictates of time and space. In my role as a spiritual guide and healer, I have looked into the development, past, present, and future, of thousands and thousands of people who have come to our shrine in Tokyo for help over the past 50 years. One of the many things I have learned is that, surprisingly, the human mind has not evolved very much over the last 10,000 years. There is less difference than one might expect between modern man and his more primitive antecedents. My experiences as a priest seem to substantiate more ancient theories of evolution, particularly those so carefully detailed in the yogic traditions of Hinduism. Simply put, this system asserts that the purpose of all existence is an ongoing evolution that ultimately results in attainment of the absolute unification with God, and that human beings die and are reborn repeatedly until they have reached this goal. The principle that governs this process of reincarnation is the law of cause and effect, or karma, as it is generally known. This book is not an argument for or against the truth of karma and reincarnation. It is rather an explanation of these mechanisms from an anecdotal and theoretical standpoint. The information is based on a lifetime of experiences with the past and the future that have guided me to formulate some general principles about karma that I believe are universally applicable. I feel with increasing intensity that the most important thing for the future of humankind is not the ever-increasing rewards of the affluent, materialistic lifestyle, but is rather the spiritual evolution of humanity. It also appears that one fundamental necessity for accelerated spiritual evolution is a thorough understanding of the realities of our existence. And I don't believe this is possible without understanding the process of reincarnation and the details of karmic law. It is through this understanding that we can begin to learn ways to free ourselves from the bondage of karma, to transcend the limits of the physical dimension, and to evolve into the enlightened being that we are all destined to become. Introduction. Spiritual Consultation. My spiritual mother, Odai-sama, was a profoundly gifted teacher and healer who began my spiritual training when I was 5 years old. She founded the Tamamitsu Shrine, of which I am now the head priest, in 1933. The shrine is dedicated to a manifestation of absolute God named Tamamitsu Okami. This deity manifested to Odai-sama in a divine vision, giving prophecies about the future of the world, including the occurrence and outcome of the Second World War, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and directing her to work for world peace. During the revelation, she heard the words, "God has no need of name or rank. Tamamitsu is simply the name I have given you to address me. Tama means jewel, and Mitsu means light, and their combination represents both divinity, wisdom, and compassion." Odai-sama was directed to institute a service for our parishioners, which we call spiritual consultations. Odai-sama performed these for many years, and I now continue the practice. A spiritual consultation is a direct communication with the appropriate manifestation of higher being about a specific problem that a parishioner is experiencing. Through meditation and prayer, I unify with the higher being, which enables me to see detailed information about the cause of the problem and the ways in which the person can overcome it. In the vast majority of cases, the problem turns out to have its root in a previous lifetime. After thousands of such experiences, I feel I can unequivocally state that we all have had past lives, and that our present situations are directly related to these previous incarnations. In fact, actions from past lives are, at the moment, creating who you are right now. I will give many examples of actual consultations throughout this book to clarify types of karma and to show how it affects real lives. Let me begin by introducing the following case history of Mrs. Y. Although the initials used throughout this text are the first letters of the actual family names, in this case only the Y is used instead of the real name upon the Y family's request. At the same time, the actual name of the temple, locations, etc., have also been eliminated or initialized in order to protect Y's privacy. The case of Ms. Y. Mrs. Y has been a devoted member of the Tamamitsu shrine for over 35 years. She has an accomplished and prosperous family. Her youngest daughter, however, began to suffer from severe clinical depression the year she turned 21. Her mother brought her to the shrine and asked for a spiritual consultation on the matter. When I entered Samadhi, a unified consciousness that is the highest state of meditation. When I enter Samadhi, the unified consciousness that is the highest state of meditation, I am able to see into the past. In Ms. Y's case, the first thing I saw was a samurai who lived about 350 years ago. As I concentrated upon him, I learned that his name was Hachiroemon Nakanose. He was the chief retainer to a famous warlord, Kiyomasa Kato, and lived in the Suwa region, which is located about 150 miles northwest of Tokyo. This was taking place during the Japanese medieval period when two political factions, the Toyotomi and the Tokugawa, were warring for control of the country. The final battle of this major civil war was at a place called Sekigahara. The Tokugawa emerged victorious and went on to rule Japan for 267 years. I saw that Nakanose had fought in this decisive battle. Then I saw a large stately tomb with Nakanose's name inscribed upon it in a certain Buddhist temple I will call the K Temple. As for his connection with our suffering Ms. Y, I saw that Nakanose had been her father in that incarnation. As his daughter, she had fallen passionately in love with a young man who was not considered suitable for her station, and whom she was not allowed to marry. Her sorrow was so great that she committed suicide in her early 20s. I also saw that the young girl, along with her mother, had been a devout Buddhist who had worshipped Amida Buddha. Amida Buddha is the main deity in the Pure Land sect, and it represents the light of everlasting life. They worshipped in a temple 350 years ago near their current home in Suwa Township. As for her present-day relationships, I saw that Ms. Y had reincarnated into the same family constellation. Nakanose had been reborn as her maternal uncle, of whom she was exceptionally fond. Her mother in the previous lifetime is her mother once again in this one. Her lover was reborn as her older brother. The cause of her depression was her attachment to her former love and to the resulting sorrow. This attachment, the emotions and thoughts that occurred as a result of the unfulfilled love, remained in her soul after her physical death. When she reincarnated in this life and then reached the same age, the sorrowful mind manifested and overtook her. Her tragedy became the basis for her reincarnation in this body with the same people in her direct family. The attachments to her intense emotions were kept as karmic seeds in her spiritual body between incarnations here on earth. These seeds became the cause of Ms. Y's reincarnation after her mother in that life had incarnated again as her mother now, and the lover as her brother. The karma of this group, the causal relation among them, had become active, and through this connection she was reincarnated. When she reached the same age now as when the incident had occurred in her former life, her strong affection for her lover and her subsequent sorrow rose to the surface, and she became psychologically ill. To dispel her depression, Ms. Y needed to detach from the long-held emotion. She had to recognize that its source was deep in the mind belonging to her past life. I counseled her to pray daily to God for help in gaining the necessary detachment, and to investigate the facts of the case as I had seen them, to help her come to an intellectual acceptance of reincarnation. When I first told Ms. Y and her mother what I had seen, they were very surprised because, in truth, their maternal family did come from Suwa. They knew of the Kei Buddhist temple because it had been their family temple for many generations. Her current uncle in particular was drawn to the temple and had made many pilgrimages to it. They knew I was completely unaware of any of this information before the consultation. However, they had never heard of Hachiro-umen Nakanose. I suggested they go to Suwa to look for evidence of his existence. They soon made the trip and began their investigation by looking up the name Nakanose in the local telephone book. It wasn't listed. They then made a visit to the resident priest of the Kei Buddhist temple, who was well into his 80s at the time. They asked if the grave of someone named Hachiro-umen Nakanose was located within the temple precincts. He replied that yes, the tomb of Nakanose had been there until a few years ago. He had been approached by Nakanose's descendants, a family of fishmongers, now known as Nakagawa, who had moved from Suwa to another town. They had asked permission to move the tomb as well, which they then did. The priest went on to tell Ms. Y and her daughter that in a corner of the temple there was still a shrine dedicated to Kiyomasa Kato. This had been built hundreds of years ago as a contribution from Hachiro-umen Nakanose. Ms. Y and her mother were delighted that their search had turned up such positive results. The following summer they went back to Suwa to see if they could find the temple where they had both worshipped Amida Buddha 350 years ago. They found a man knowledgeable in local lore who gave them a list of 8 possible temples, old ones where Amida might have been enshrined. They brought the list back to me. As I stared at the list for a while, I had the realization that the S Buddha temple, one of the 8, was the temple they were looking for. In the summer of the following year, the 3rd since the consultation concerning Nakanose, they returned to Suwa and, with the aid of a detailed map, found the S Buddhist temple, where they had worshipped Amida Buddha in their past life. It is a very old pagoda, located, it turns out, close to the Kei temple. Amida Buddha was indeed enshrined there. They both felt a profound sense of familiarity and deep spiritual connection to the temple. On the way back from S Temple, they went to the municipal library to check the historical archives of the province. They found the entry Nakanose Hachiro-umen listed in a medieval record. This was followed by a brief description. Kei Temple, a retainer of Kiyomasa Kato, the year 1562 to 1611. They had therefore found historical proof that Hachiro-umen Nakanose had actually existed 350 years ago. During this 3-year period of consultation, Ms. Y devotedly continued her daily prayers and was able to detach from her past situation, and her depression gradually disappeared. She is now successfully managing her own art gallery in Tokyo. Karma. The point I wish to illustrate with this example is that Ms. Y's illness and family situation are directly linked to her past life. She is not a discrete being limited to the current, present world. Neither are any of us. As many religions have taught throughout the ages, we human beings have an existence that is much deeper and wider than that which is manifest in this dimension. The nucleus of the self, the soul, is like the stitching of a garment in which one side of the cloth represents life and the other death. In the same way as the thread of the garment runs from one side of the cloth to the other, so the soul continues to exist from one life to the next. The self is a continuous phenomenon that is ruled by the laws of cause and effect, by karma. Every action causes a reaction. Both positive and negative circumstances are caused by karma, as well as the general characteristics of a personality. Karmic laws, when understood, explain how an innocent child can unexpectedly grow into a very violent adult. Karmic laws help us to understand why a wonderful person does nothing but suffer, or why a person with a rotten character manages to be a success. We expect good actions in this life to produce good results. When they don't, we have to look into the long, many-generational process of the individual and find the reason. Although karma controls every aspect of life, it is important to realize that one is able to change his or her karma and to affect the way the past manifests in the here and now. The point of a spiritual consultation, in fact, is to teach the person ways to dissolve the specific karma that is manifesting problematically. I have grown to believe that the reason we are born here on earth is to work on the dissolution of the various karmas that bind us to this dimension in order to advance to a point where we are able to transcend karma completely. Each individual is born into a web of interrelated karmic influences. Everyone is more or less influenced by at least 5 categories of karma. Personal, which is to say individual, familial, local, national, and global. I will explain what these are and how they interact. We will also see that the way karma manifests is affected by the way one lives one's life. It is not predetermined that a certain act performed in the past life must necessarily bear, let us say, 100 karmic fruits in this life. It isn't that simple. Depending on one's present state of consciousness, lifestyle, and degree of faith, a past act can manifest as only 1 little fruit, or 100, or 1,000, or none at all. The instructions given in a spiritual consultation help to ease the severity of karmic manifestation, or to dissolve a certain karma completely. These instructions usually outline practices to follow in 3 areas: behavior modification, prayer, and meditation. The instructions and practices given are often difficult because they deal with dissolving karma directly, and each person must dissolve the karma he or she has created by him or herself. A person is completely responsible for his or her own karma. There are no real shortcuts. A teacher can help a person get from point A to point B, but he can't make the journey in place of the disciple. Teachers can't carry their disciples from start to finish on their backs. They can point out the direction to go, indicate the easiest path, and lend a helping hand when a disciple is exhausted, but the individual must actually make the journey by him or herself. This journey is one that leads a person to a point where, through detachment and dissolution, one is able to transcend karma at the same time that one is alive in the world of karma. This point is a great step forward towards the state of enlightenment. I find the world we live in to be a profoundly miraculous place. I'm continually struck by wonder at the fact that everything in the world arises out of nothingness. And I feel that every existence, every life, even a life that appears bad or evil, needs to be treasured. In the journey of waves across the ocean, we see a continual change between highness and lowness. We don't call the high waves good and the low waves bad, but we recognize that if the low places did not exist as a base, the high places could not exist either. The summit of a mountain could not exist without the base. The whole is composed of its parts. When one comes to understand karma for what it is, one realizes the inherent interconnectedness of all life. While still existing in this world, one can simultaneously experience the existence of higher reality and past and future lives. Again, I believe that the purpose of life is to dissolve karma, all types of karma. One is not only responsible for his or her personal karma, but for national and global karma as well. We can liken the totality of existence to a river that is running to the world of enlightenment. The river courses past mountains, races through narrow gorges, and cascades over steep drops. Let us say that each drop of water in the river is an individual human being. The river can only run freely to the extent that each drop is pure. As individuals dissolve and purify their karmas, national and global karma will dissolve naturally as a result. The Absolute, the Creator, God, has manifested on earth in many saintly forms throughout history to teach us how to do this. I believe, for example, that Lord Tamamitsu is working through our shrine to help the solar system in its movement towards perfection. And there are similar manifestations happening all throughout the world. Within the vast aggregate of all life on earth, each one of us is an individual. Each human being has an important and intrinsic duty to this existence. The total whole of the individual parts is what moves our world. So if each part is not purified, the whole cannot become pure. When even one small human being dies, the living whole is affected. Every person contains within himself the condensation of divine power and limitless possibilities. When everyone is able to realize this potential, we will reach the final point in time when all will become one with God. It is my earnest wish that the information contained within the following pages will help you to understand your own karma and how you can more effectively dissolve it. Chapter 1. Individual Karma, Life and Death. The three dimensions. The karma and reincarnation of any individual person functions within the structure of a multidimensional reality. As people or human beings, we exist simultaneously in three dimensions of being: the physical, the astral, and the causal. These are the three dimensions of existence that directly comprise the earth. Over the course of time, our bodies and souls incarnate into and out of these planes through a process we call being born and dying. A spirit manifest, living on earth as a human being, has three bodies: a physical, and astral, and a causal body. A spirit manifest, living, in the astral dimension has an astral body and a causal body. A spirit manifest as itself in the causal dimension has just one body, the causal body. While on earth we possess a corresponding mind or consciousness to each of the three bodies. The mind-body complexes overlie and interpenetrate one another. The physical is the smallest of the three, and the causal is the largest, extending beyond the physical body in a surrounding oval. Each body-mind has within itself 7 energy centers for controlling the vital energy and a system of energy channels. These channels are known in Sanskrit as nadis, and the centers controlling them are known as chakras. The chakras also work as centers of interchange between neighboring dimensions. The astral body-mind is the repository of all desire and all emotion, and unconsciously determines much of our behavior when we exist within normal human lifetimes. Both the physical and astral bodies are characterized by duality, the qualities of attraction and repulsion, positive and negative. The physical body sustains itself through the attraction and intake of air and food, all the elements that nourish and sustain it. When functioning in a healthy manner, the body rejects all substances that are harmful or unnecessary to its maintenance, keeping a balanced relationship to the external environment. When this balance is broken, sickness and abnormality result. Similarly, the astral body attracts what it desires and rejects what it does not desire. The causal body is the same as the Christian concept of the spirit, as the astral body is to the notion of soul, in that it is the highest part of our being, the part closest to God. At the moment of creation, the individual is differentiated from the One, God, and the causal body is born. The causal body is that most closely related to the Absolute. As such, it is beyond duality. Accordingly, it is neither male nor female. All the elements necessary for existence are combined here in perfect equilibrium and pure life energy. The urge to realize this part of ourselves and thereby to regain identity with the Absolute engenders the desire for spiritual evolution. Though it is beyond the distinction of duality, the causal body is still an individuated entity, in the sense that it has the power to manifest in diverse forms. The physical is its grossest form. The astral is the subtle form. When we are born, we are conscious only in the physical realm. As our consciousness evolves, we gradually become aware of and gain control over the astral realm as well. As we become totally conscious of the ascending dimensions of being, we break through at last into awareness of the causal body. This is the springboard from which total reunification with the Absolute, undifferentiated consciousness can take place. The 3 dimensions that we exist in as individuals are part of a much larger reality. Beyond the causal dimension are various dimensions of divine being, of God. And each and every dimension is subsumed in the Absolute, whose creative aspect gives rise to all the forms and dimensions of reality. Before discussing in detail how the physical world is related to the other dimensions, let us examine their characteristics in some detail. The astral dimension, lower and higher. The astral dimension is the other side of life. It is where most people exist after they die. The astral dimension has two divisions, the lower and the higher. The lower astral is similar to the popular notions of hell and purgatory. The higher astral corresponds to the general idea of heaven. The controlling principle of the astral dimension is the mind, just as matter is the controlling principle here on earth. The astral is a world of ideas. Essentially, this means that in the astral dimension, thought creates reality. The mind has a direct effect on the external environment. You get what you want, or at least you get what you think about. Astral beings do possess a body, but it is much more elastic than the rigid shells we walk around with here on Earth. Otherwise, astral beings are quite similar to who they were when they existed here on Earth. As one's consciousness evolves, one is able to see the astral dimension and to communicate directly with those living in it. The basic difference between the lower and the higher astral is that the lower is inhabited by beings who project a contentious negativity and emotional attachment, whereas the higher is peopled by souls who project a more harmonious positivism. The lower astral. The lower astral realm is somewhat like a dream state here on Earth, but more like a recurring nightmare that is beyond the ability of the conscious mind to stop. In the lower astral dimensions, beings are living the nightmare, and they can't wake up. They no longer have the power of the physical plane of consciousness or reason to separate themselves from the emotions engendered by the dream. Spirits in the lower astral are trapped in intensely emotional states. The more negative the condition of the astral mind, the more miserable the suffering. The spirit's degree of attachment, whether it be to pain, anger, hatred, despair, physical passion, or whatever, holds them prisoner. Their attachment keeps them prisoner. This attachment can take many, many long years to wear itself out, and all the while, the being's negative thoughts continue to affect his or her existence and the surrounding astral environment. I know a man named Mr. S, whose father died of lung cancer. During my dealings with Mr. S, I have had cause to encounter his father, who is presently existing in the lower astral dimension. Although he no longer possesses actual lungs, he is still suffering terribly from lung pain. He is directing his mind to the pain he suffered while on earth, and that mind has created actual suffering for him now in the lower astral. He is stuck and can't move into the higher astral. This is a common condition of beings in the lower astral dimension. The higher astral. The higher astral dimension is also similar to the world of dreams here on Earth. It is also a world of conception, a realm in which thoughts effect real changes in oneself and one's surroundings. It is a world where it is possible, if one is content, to remain in the same condition for a very long time. Here is such an example. Our shrine and institute are located on a tract of land bordering a beautiful park in Tokyo. After purchasing the land, I felt the presence of a very old soul exerting a protective influence over the property. Upon closer inspection, I realized that the soul was a powerful tribal leader who had lived on this land 3,500 years ago. He died and has been in the higher astral dimension all that time. I have since erected a small shrine to him to ensure the protection of the land, and we worship him by the name of Jinushi Okami. This tribal leader and his people continue to live in the deep past. Their world is thickly wooded. Wild dogs run freely. They live in small villages, make their own pottery and clothing, and reside in Neolithic-style structures. The chieftain of this tribe still lives a luxurious life, pampered by his many wives. And all this is going on in the astral dimension at the same time and in the same place that we are living out our modern lives in the physical dimension. I have been able to make some contact with this entity, and he has come to have some understanding of the way in which the world has changed, but he is happy with his ancient ways and does not wish to change anything, nor does he have to. He is just one example of someone who is satisfied to be existing in a dimension where thoughts create reality. People in similarly contented situations may choose to stay that way for hundreds or thousands of years. After all, in such dimensions, people don't have to suffer from any physical desires. It is clearly a less troublesome state of existence. But in parallel to the lower astral spirit who is trapped in negative emotion and cannot move, people who get too comfortable in the higher astral dimension make no evolutionary progress at all. They are so completely and subjectively consumed by their own conceptions that they are also stuck, running on the same spot. They are not moving any closer to enlightenment. However, the vast majority of people do come back to this earth as soon as they have the chance. This does not mean they necessarily feel that this world is better than where they were, but it is evidence of their great attachment to physical reality. It is very rare to find someone who really believes, "I've had more than enough and I'm never coming back." And even if they say that, they usually end up coming back anyway. Most people are born again within 100 years of their last death. Birth. The process of being born a human being is actually quite complicated and controlled by many regulations. It is more difficult to be born here from the lower astral realms than it is from the higher, for instance. In the lower astral realms of the spiritual world, there are a multitude of beings who want to be born onto this earth. However, it is not possible for all of them to achieve this. There is a specific screening process, a set of conditions which must be met before a being is allowed to re-enter and be reborn on earth. Although maintained and controlled by karma, the screening process itself is a divine device to protect us here on earth from the more negative elements of existence. The lower astral beings who are rejected by this screening process are left with no choice but to continue their growth in the lower astral, no matter how slowly, inching their way closer to true awakening. One type of lower astral spirit I encounter frequently is what we call a fetal spirit. Beings who have been miscarried or aborted into the lower astral realms. Fetal spirits are quite bizarre looking. They are wrinkled all over, have large goggling eyes, and emit a strange glow. Many people who have aborted a child carry with them a deep sense of guilt. In certain cases, however, this sense of guilt is not justified. I have come to this conclusion by closely examining fetal spirits themselves. The individuals who have the karma to become fetal spirits tend to be extraordinarily selfish. They tend to be the type of people who would do anything to promote their own self-interest, even killing to get what they want. In effect, our world is better off if these people are not born into it. I want to be clear that this does not mean I am necessarily pro-abortion, which I am not, but wish to indicate that the Absolute, God, in its infinite wisdom, has laid down intricate guidelines to protect us from the worst elements of existence, and that sometimes abortion is useful for this purpose. The guidelines that regulate the process of being born on the earth are more far-reaching than those that regulate individual karma. They are the principles that regulate and maintain a delicate balance between the physical and astral realms, and are karmic principles of both restriction and harmony. Basically, these principles act as a limitation on who can be born here. The fact that you are alive proves that you have met the basic requirements. Again, most of the individuals who are not allowed to leave the lower astral realms are extremely negative. This negativity is caused by undue and extreme self-attachment, what we could even call evil here on earth. Following the principle that thought produces reality, these lower astral beings create a state of being which, as a conglomerate, fits the common notion of hell. Naturally, beings who exist in these places want to get out of them as quickly as possible. They see being born on earth as their escape. Using the power of this overwhelming desire, a being can sometimes force its way through the safety net and get itself conceived into an infant's body. But such conceptions rarely result in birth. Usually the beings are miscarried or are aborted, and are sent back to the lower astral realm where they came from. They may repeat this process a number of times. Occasionally, the desire to be born may be so tremendous that the being manages to slip through the restrictive screening and obtain a birth. These beings may be born deformed as a result of the unnaturalness of their method of entry. Fortunately, most children are born from the astral into the physical plane as healthy little people, and they come with full karmic package. Many parents wonder at the fact that their children, though physically similar, have such startlingly different personalities. In Japanese, we have the proverb, "Frogs breed frogs." In English, you say, "like father, like son." But we also have the proverb, "Eagles bear falcons," or in English, "Black hens lay white eggs." These seemingly conflicting proverbs are all apparently true. I do a lot of work with computers. It fascinates me how one small change in a program can cause it to produce a completely different result. Heredity likewise depends on a program, the linkage of a certain number of genes. If one of the genes is damaged, or if the order of the lineup is changed, the child produced inherits the changes. There are many ways for such changes to occur, and even if the major pattern is the same, one small change can produce tremendous differences between two individuals. Although this is a sound medical explanation of how one set of parents give birth to two completely different children, it in no way explains how these minute changes in gene linkages come about. I believe they come about in response to the karmic makeup of the individual. If one can see differences in the children of the same parents, the variety widens as one looks in on, say, an elementary school class. Each child's own quirks and talents are very obvious at this stage. The children have not yet accumulated much knowledge about this world and exist as a more raw material state. Many of the characteristics a child possesses represent a continuation of his or her unique nature from a previous incarnation. For a few years after birth, a child has memories of the astral dimension he or she has so recently left. The quality of those memories is similar to that which an adult may experience when you wake up from a dream and are steeped in the feeling of the experience but can't quite remember the details. The astral memory a child possesses is one reason for children's frankness and naivete. Children have just come from a place where desire and visualization create reality. It can be very difficult for children to accept the fact that they can no longer wish things or situations into existence. They have to learn that in this world they are shackled with the physical body, and that this restricts their exercise of total selfishness and willfulness. Some children become very dark and depressed and angry when they are forced to realize that they are locked up inside their own tight little shell. Lately, in the home life sections of the Japanese newspapers, there have been a rash of stories about children with severe phobias and other psychological conditions like autism. These problems obviously cause suffering not only in the child but also in the whole family. The following is a story of such a child. A mother and father from Kamakura came to see me. Their son was suffering terribly from school phobia, among other fears and behavioral problems. The parents were not able to understand the source or cause of their son's suffering and were extremely worried. The family itself is an old and wealthy one, and the son is the only male child in a family of girls. The parents admitted to spoiling all of their children, but they didn't feel that this was enough to cause the extent of the boy's problems. I performed a spiritual consultation about the cause of these problems and found out that the boy had been a commander in the powerful Heike clan in a former life. This was in the 12th century, when the Heike clan was under attack from the Genji clan. The Genji had a powerful leader named Yoritomo, who wound up establishing his shogunate in Kamakura and founding the Kamakura period from the year 1185 to 1333 AD. The boy had been the observer of the entire Kanto area for the Heike, and as such was an extremely powerful and important person. Yoritomo wanted the Kanto area and tried to take it by force. At one point, the Heike defeated Yoritomo at a place called Ishibayashi-yama. But eventually, Yoritomo recouped his strength and went on to conquer the entire area. Several hundred of the Heike warriors tried to flee Kamakura by ship to a town on the Izu Peninsula called Usami. When they got there, however, Yoritomo's forces were ready and waiting. They captured all the Heike warriors and killed them one by one on the beach. The boy in our story was the last of them to be killed. When I spoke to his mother later, I asked if her son had ever exhibited any negativity towards the Usami area. Shocked, she replied that yes, this had been another source of conflict. Apparently, the family owns a summer house in the very town of Usami, and though the other children loved to go there, the son was intractable in his refusal to go anywhere near the place. This, of course, had totally baffled his parents. She also told me that they are direct descendants of the Heike family, a fact that I was not aware of when I began the inquiry. In fact, I rarely know many specifics about a person when he or she comes for a spiritual consultation for the first time. Most people are at first quite skeptical of the process and need to test me a bit, so they rarely offer me much information. This is fine, as such prior knowledge is irrelevant to the efficacy of the consultation. If, however, someone is mentally defying me to a strong degree, I psychically see a thick cloud surrounding them. In such cases, I will tell the person that I don't feel they are serious enough about the consultation and that we shouldn't attempt to do it at the present time. If a person doesn't come to me openly and honestly, I cannot connect with their being effectively. We can easily see why this child was suffering so miserably. He died in a state of complete terror after watching hundreds of his compatriots lined up on a beach and decapitated. Locked in his emotions are both the intense attachment to the life he had at that time and the unspeakable horror of his death. When a being moves into the astral dimension, holding on to such attachment and terror, the soul continues experiencing much suffering there, potentially for an extremely long time. In this way, the boy was still suffering, and was manifesting his suffering in part as a strong aversion to Usami, the site of his summer home, and phobias and behavioral problems in his hometown of Kamakura. Usami is where he lost his life, and Kamakura was the victorious capital of his former enemies. Death. The feelings, emotions, and thoughts which make up the unconscious, called the manas in Sanskrit, are the mind we take with us into the astral dimension when we die. The feelings and emotions one experiences at death are key factors in determining the kind of existence one will lead in the other world. It is important to try to stand firm in death, to watch with detachment as the old identity is cast off. If one dies in a great state of attachment, one is likely to end up in the lower astral realm. People who die in a state of abject terror often find themselves in that situation. Moreover, the mindset at death can reappear in an amplified form at the time of rebirth into this world, as I found in the case of that unaccountably miserable child. Death does not necessarily entail suffering, however. My natural mother, Seiko Sensei, and I were lying asleep on either side of Odai-sama the night she died. Odai-sama did not reveal herself to me in my dreams that night, but I cherish the first clear vision I had of her after her death. It took place after her funeral, following her cremation. Odai-sama appeared to me, wearing the 12-layered kimono I had last seen her in, and, with divine countenance, said, "My body has been committed to ashes, but my being has not. I am now with God." For about 1 month after that vision, Odai-sama continued to appear to me in a reclining position, and it seemed as though she were resting. From then until now, she often appears as she looked in her 20s and 30s, and is as energetic as she was in that active period of her life when she was traveling throughout Japan doing spiritual practice. Since her death, she seems to have attained an even greater understanding of this world, and I often hear her voice at my heart or on top of my head when I'm doing a spiritual consultation about a particularly difficult problem. It is wonderful when someone can move into a divine realm as quickly as Odai-sama was able to. For the majority of human beings, however, death is not quite as easy. Members of our shrine often come to request help when one of their family is dying. I go into meditation in front of the altar and usually receive a clear vision of the failing person. If the situation has passed into the critical stage, if the person's pulse has stopped or if the fever is extremely high, the soul usually appears to be floating above the body. Occasionally, with a tremendous concentration of energy, I am able to help the being return into the body. In the majority of cases, however, the person has reached the end of his or her karmically determined lifespan and does die. If the person has not reached the end of his or her lifetime, no matter how sick he or she appears, they will definitely recover and live until the appointed time of death. When someone dies, what I and the surviving loved ones can do is to help the soul make its passage into the higher astral realms as easily as possible. Just as most spirits are unaware in life, they are unaware of what is going on in the death process. I will go into the mechanism of dying later on, but for now, suffice it to say that most people are not immediately aware that they are dead, even after their soul has left their body. The spirit continues to contain and feed on a certain amount of energy it carries over from the physical dimension, and it continues to direct itself towards this 3D plane. This energy dissipates in a week or two, and then a difficult period may set in. The spirit often begins to suffer from unbearable hunger and thirst, a feeling of starvation. This is because it still thinks it is alive, yet is unable to find any substance. The spirit may find itself alone in a kind of deep, dark pit, and it cannot figure out where it is or what it is doing there. I have seen this painful condition continue for 2 or 3 weeks in some cases, 1 or 2 months in others. The individual spirit eventually comes to realize what has happened and to accept the fact of his or her death. Then he or she is ready to move on to the next karmically determined place of existence. During the difficult period before the soul becomes aware of its new situation, it is a tremendous help if relatives and friends are praying and making offerings on the deceased's behalf. Rituals of mourning have a real purpose, more primary than that of comforting those left behind. They greatly aid the deceased individual in waking up to the new reality of his or her condition. For this reason, I always feel sorry for people who die with no one around to mourn them, because it seems especially difficult for these people to rise up to the higher dimensions. People who are killed in battle or in an unexpected accident have a particularly difficult time of it because they tend to be paralyzed by the fear that overcame them at the moment of death and are not able to move out of that terror into another state. It is especially difficult for these beings to realize that they are dead. Intercessionary prayers, particularly those of spiritually evolved people, can be of great help in facilitating any suffering spirit's passage to the next stage. On being human. Through my work, I have come to believe that existence as a human being on the physical plane is an extraordinary opportunity that should be deeply cherished. The Absolute, the Creator, God, has made this world with its universal government as a specific arena where the evolution of consciousness can take place. Beings who make the most of this opportunity and reach a highly evolved state can move into the embodied causal plane or beyond into the divine realms of pure consciousness after death. They are free to make rapid spiritual progress on those planes and to interact at will with the lower planes. A causal being appears disembodied to an astral being. The astral individual perceives the causal one as a dazzling sphere of light or as a shining halo. Causal beings often act as guardian angels to individuals with whom they have karmic relationships or as protectors of certain areas or communities. However, it is almost impossible for the spirits in the astral world to pass directly into the causal dimension. To accomplish the move, they must attain a state of self-awareness and freedom from attachment to their thoughts and emotions that is difficult to accomplish in the astral dimension because of the inherent structure of that dimension itself. Since it is a dimension ruled by emotion and thought, there is little leverage to separate oneself from obsessive attachment to emotion and thought. The astral is a subjective rather than objective reality, one in which mind and matter are more intimately connected than they are on earth, and where it is very difficult for consciousness to undergo any significant changes. Herein lies the genius of the physical plane. We are necessarily born with physical bodies, and physical reality is the level that enables us to separate from our mental processes. To give a simple example, suppose you're staring out a window, obsessed with a lover who has rejected you, or some promotion at work that you failed to get. No matter how lost in thought you may be, eventually you're going to get hungry. As the hunger grows more insistent, it temporarily causes you to disengage from your obsession and concentrate on the physical actions necessary to fulfill your hunger. In a similar fashion, we are able to use our will and our reason to separate us from the negative attachment patterns and bad habits, and ultimately to dissolve the karma that binds us here. Compared with the material of the astral world, physical matter, though connected, holds a greater degree of independence from the mind. If you concentrate on a spoon lying on a table in front of you and mentally command it to move, chances are it won't. The mental desire to overcome an illness will not produce an instant cure very often. When we wish to control matter in the physical world, we must first make mental cognition of it through the senses, and then act upon it in a physical way, using the body or a physical instrument. Because the power of the physical is so much stronger here than in the astral dimension, there are more chances to free ourselves from attachments through the agency of our senses and physical and mental activity. It is easier for a mind to attain self-reflection and spiritual growth in the physical world than in the astral world. In other words, God made this 3D earth for us to make our spiritual growth easier than it is in the astral world. If you are listening to this, not only do you have the great fortune to be born on the physical plane, but thanks to your parents, you have been born as a human being rather than as some other member of the animal or vegetable kingdom. Monkeys may be perfectly content to be monkeys, but they don't possess the mental capabilities to gain true self-awareness. Learning experiments conducted in the United States on chimpanzees have demonstrated that the animals do have a rudimentary thought process. They can be taught to push a certain combination of buttons to ask for juice, or to request that someone they don't like be removed from the room. This is useful in that it proves the ability to verbalize and to think are not necessarily connected. But it doesn't prove that monkeys are able to control their emotional reactions. Human children exhibit a similar level of mental and emotional reaction to monkeys. The main difference between children and adults, in fact, is that adults are more able to control their reactions and the expression of them. If an adult meets someone he doesn't like, he should have the ability to repress a rude negative reaction and to reflect upon his feelings. Unfortunately for society, there are adults whose inability to reflect upon or control their emotions renders them more animal than human. Pity the poor cow. Before the advent of the machine, cows were yoked and made to plow the fields for hours on end. Soil can be excruciatingly heavy, from morning till night, dragging the plow through acres and acres of earth, and the final reward for all this labor was to end up as beef on the farmer's table. Compared to such a life, yours is quite special.